So when somebody's judging you, so if someone has a really hateful thing to say about you, it's likely from an insecurity that they already feel about themselves. So I always say it very bluntly. I'm like, nobody cares about you, right? It's not about you. Even when it's directed straight to you, it's still not about you. It's still about that individual person. So what I do with clients very specifically is I help them understand and wade through that nothing that anyone else says or does, even if they look directly at you and say it's about you, is about you. So we can't take it personal. And then the second concept I like to walk clients through is that everybody's right. Nobody's wrong. Right. So if someone has something to say about your bald head, let them be right. You don't have to be righter than them. Right. You know, you're.
Welcome to Networking Star. I am your host, Jeffery Boyle. Here on this podcast, I talk to very interesting people, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and people that just really help us have, be, and do more with the way that they help us think. Today, I'm joined by Kayla Burch. She is a business and mindset coach, and she does it by eliminating excuses, barriers, and limiting beliefs. Kayla, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Well, I'm excited you're here. So I meet most of the guests for my podcast on Instagram, and I found, so you're a mother of four.
Yes.
You're happily married, and anybody that's a mother of four. So I've got 5 kids, and my wife is certainly the CEO of our house. How do you mix being the mother of 4? Because they're not old. You've got all kinds of ages up there.
Yeah.
How do you mix being a mother, being that busy, and running this business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So also I like to add, on top of being a mom of 4, I homeschool my babies too. So
I saw that too. I should have done it. My wife has told me that there's no chance that she will homeschool the kids. So
yeah, so that one kind of just accidentally happened, and we loved it and ran with it. So I always find that the more that you focus on what you're doing and you set your intentions, and the less you tell yourself that it's hard, it's not as hard. Right? You're not finding the difficulties in creating balance in your day because you're not creating them with saying that there's going to be difficulties in your day. So what I like to do is I like to just kind of really schedule my day around like my clients, and then I fill in our homeschooling in between versus filling in our homeschooling and filling my clients in. I find that it works a lot better because those are more structured, and then we can be flexible. So that's how I do it. If I was telling anyone how you
training your kids from an early age to be flexible.
Just be flexible. Yeah. Like that's life. Life is flexible. If you can't flex with it and you have to be on a rigid schedule, then you're going to have a really rude awakening once you actually get out into the world.
I did a talk recently, and it talked about just the magnificent skills that children have from the age 2 to 7. That's when most of their growth really happens, and their ability to completely just fail all the time and be just unfazed by it.
Yeah.
Walking is a great example. Fall down, get up, fall down, get up, and then running, fall down more, get hurt more, but just they are undaunted. What, as a mother and as a business coach, how is it that you use your kids as an example and on how to live life?
I love that you say that. And because I actually use my kids a lot as examples, because I feel that my children and adults were no different. Our bodies are just bigger, right? And then we lose some of the capabilities that we had as children. So children are more advanced than we are. They're less afraid. They have less barriers. They have less restrictions. They have less judgment for self and for others. So they're able to go out there and fail. And I say that all the time. Like, it's not that we're so scared of failure as adults. We're really scared of the success. And you think back about your life, the failing of anything that you've learned to do as a child, the walking, the talking, the reading, all of those things. It wasn't the fear of the failure, right? You just kept doing it. It's just what you knew until society started to tell us that it wasn't okay to fail. Like somewhere in between there, that's when we stopped. So that's a big, that example that you used is something that I use with my clients as well. But also just a lot of not having judgment. I love to use children as an example for no judgment, because they don't just wake up and judge themselves. It's not that children don't get critical of themselves. They do, but they let it go. It's in the moment. It's like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Or, oh, I wish I was better at that. And then they run off and do something different, right? It doesn't now haunt them. And we can also, as parents, we can help shape our children by helping them learn how to go through those judgments. But we can do that the same as us, which is what I do with my clients.
I think you use the word haunt them. That that's pretty powerful, because I think so many times, one, we're afraid to fail, which is crazy, because there's no way that you're going to succeed without just a mountain of failures. But that's really powerful. I think that that's kind of the differentiator of those 2 to 7 year olds, and even, it's a little bit less as they get older, but they're not haunted by the mistakes that they're making.
Yeah.
Why is that such a big deal in particular, that haunting for the clients that you work with?
Yeah, because once we have that haunting, it creates this barrier. It creates a resistance from trying, because you can't go to sleep at night because you are so freaked out by the one word you said wrong on your live video, right? You're just like, oh my gosh, or my hair wasn't right, or I didn't look good, or my makeup wasn't done, or all these things. People are going to judge me for the way I look. And it becomes this story that you just keep repeat and repeat and you repeat, and you say, well, I wasn't good enough then. And then you show up on video and you stumble over your words. And then you validate that thought. And then it haunts you because you're like, I knew it. There it is. I wasn't as good as I thought I was going to be. And I proved it by fill in the blanks, right? Because when you're seeking it, you will find it every time.
So what I enjoyed as I followed you on Instagram and started reading some of the different things that you put, you're very no nonsense. It's obvious that you're the mother of four. And I don't know how you can be the mother of four and put up with a lot of nonsense. So how does that carry over also, as you're speaking with people? One of the testimonials on your page, one of your women coaches, she had gone from 2 clients, I think, to 80 clients in working with you. Why does the no nonsense approach work so well, you think, for you?
Yeah. So I think that we are in a society that we take everything for surface value, right? It's just, we have to be perfect on the outside. We have to live that way. Things just have to look that way. But that's all BS, right? That's all surface level. And so when you get down to it, I always say different, same thing, different package, right? All of my clients come with the same thing, but presented in a different package, different traumas, different hauntings, right? If you will. It's all that is. So the reason why, when you cut straight through that, nobody's allowing you to be a victim to anything anymore. You're not allowing yourself to be a victim to your circumstances. You realize you create your own reality, and you can't do that if someone's just saying, oh, but it's okay. It did happen, right? It did happen, and we sugarcoat it, and we just keep repeating and keep validating these experiences. And that doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah. The victim triangle, I think, is something that just completely incapacitates people with this downward spiral. One of my favorite people to listen to is Jocko Willink. Jocko Willink's a former Navy SEAL, and he talks about taking ultimate responsibility. If you're the CEO, just like when he was a Navy SEAL, he took responsibility for every failure, and then he pushed the successes and the credits off to other people. But I love that approach, and that's essentially what you're talking about is that you have to take responsibility for what's happening. Fair, unfair, however it is. Explain that a little bit more, and how that is just crippling so many different people to succeed.
Yeah. And this one actually triggers a lot of people, because they're like, but these really horrific things happen to me. So I always like to say, I'm not dismissing that. There's a lot of really traumatic and horrific things that have happened to, myself and others in life. But the difference is that we don't have to identify as the victim of it, right? We're not victim of our circumstances. So that doesn't have to be our identity anymore, right? So when you take personal responsibility with where you're at, you can say, a lot of really bad things have happened to me, but I choose not to bring them into my present moment today and keep reliving them. Like I'm not going to give those circumstances or those people power over me today. I'm going to have the personal responsibility to make the changes and take the action today that are going to get me to where I want to go. So it's just a lot about release. And this is another thing about not having any BS, is a lot of people will encourage people to hold on to that. And it's like, just let it go. It doesn't serve you. So why would you keep bringing it into day after day after day after day?
Yeah. I really listen to a lot of different podcasts. I read a lot of different things. And there was a female speaker that was spectacular, where she talked about that it's important to let go of that, but also make sure that you don't continue the relationships with the people that are hurting you.
Yeah.
So where is that balance in that, in releasing that, but also making sure that you're not putting yourself in harm's way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's, depends on like the circumstance, of course. So, of course, if you're in a harmful situation, you don't want to just say, oh, I'll just change it tomorrow, change it tomorrow. You want to remove yourself from the situation. And that comes with personal responsibility, because when you're no longer a victim to your situation, you can see a lot more clearly. You can say, I don't want to be here. This isn't where I want to be. I'm going to remove myself and take action to care for myself and take responsibility for me, and stop allowing that behavior and those situations to repeat themselves. But it's also recognizing that sometimes things happen to us, and this is where I think that there's kind of like that fine line. Sometimes things happen to us and it's not because of anything we did, so that's not our responsibility, right? It's not our responsibility of the actions that somebody else takes towards us. It's our responsibility with what we do with it afterwards. That I think that's the heavy part that people don't understand, because they get so weighed down by being the victim to whatever their circumstance, big and small. We become the victim and we don't take any action after that.
Yeah, the victim mentality is tough. I think I don't know how you can succeed long term if you're constantly playing the victim. If you're meeting with, uh, let's just say, I know you work with a lot of coaches, and your goal is to help them really cut through the nonsense and really get to solutions and looking for the solutions rather than finding the reasons why they can't succeed. What is probably the most common victim mentality, I guess, that people come to you that you immediately recognize and try to help them overcome?
Yeah, I think one of them is that, well, it's kind of a mixture. And this goes back to some of the language I was using before of like the judgment of others. So they think that they're victim to what somebody else thinks of them, right? So that's a big one. No matter what industry you're in, if you're showing up on social media and you feel victim to somebody else's opinion of you, you're not going to make it very far, right? Because now you're being validated through that. But then if you go deeper than that, a lot of it's about your self-worth. They don't value themselves enough to lean on their own thoughts. So a lot of the self-worth, of course, you study a lot of these things, that comes from childhood, right? So as a child, this happened to me. As a child and growing up, I didn't have this or I didn't have that. All valid, all very valid. But we have to open our eyes to it and let it go, because you're not a child anymore. Right. And that's where a lot of people still have that victim mentality. It's because they're still pulling that childhood experience into their adult life, into the today.
Do you think that that's one of the reasons, or something that is pushed on social media, in the news anymore, that you're a victim, it's not your fault? Do you believe that is something that it's almost like a credo that a lot of people are trying to make feel better, that you're not accomplishing something because it's not your fault?
Yeah, I think that is a huge message that we hear all the time. Almost everywhere you turn, it's somebody else's fault that you're not succeeding. It's somebody else's fault that you're not where you're supposed to be or you want to be, right? And it's a lot easier for that to happen. It's a lot easier to say, "Oh, well, Jeffrey, it's your fault." Right? You've pushed me down for whatever reason, so I can't show up that way. And yeah, I think it's a huge theme, and it's very damaging. Because, and I think a lot of the things is it's making us look externally for validation all the time. So it's saying that if someone doesn't validate me for something I did well, or they validate me for something that they feel I don't do well, then I'm just relying on them versus relying on myself to validate my experiences.
Yeah. I've got a gal on my team that is just wonderful, and she is so complimentary, and she works so hard. And as my Instagram and Facebook and some of the different accounts were starting to get more people on there, I also started getting some of the haters, people throwing shade on me. And I didn't know it, but she had hid a couple of the mean comments, because she said, "Jeff, that was so mean." One of them was about having no hair. Another one was, I can't even remember, just crazy, crazy, silly remarks. And I said, "Leave them." And
Mm-hmm.
she couldn't believe that I would allow her to leave them. And I would almost always respond to the person, not in a hateful tone. And it always surprised her that I would do that. Whereas I think that a lot of people, that can really incapacitate them. I mean, it's not a fun thing to lose your
Yeah.
hair. And it's obviously, when you're on Instagram or social media, you put a reel out there, it's not easy. How do you help that new coach be comfortable with his or her imperfections and flaws like that?
Yeah, I love that. That's a huge thing that I focus on because a lot of things are social media right now. And so I always give a concept. You probably are familiar with it, but it's that we're all mirrors to each other. So when somebody's judging you, so if someone has a really hateful thing to say about you, it's likely from an insecurity that they already feel about themselves. So I always say it very bluntly. I'm like, nobody cares about you, right? It's not about you. Even when it's directed straight to you, it's still not about you. It's still about that individual person. So what I do with clients very specifically is I help them understand and wade through that nothing that anyone else says or does, even if they look directly at you and say it's about you, is about you. So we can't take it personal. And then the second concept I like to walk clients through is that everybody's right. Nobody's wrong. Right. So if someone has something to say about your bald head, let them be right. You don't have to be righter than them. Right. You
Yeah.
are bald, so it's like there's these things, these concepts that we don't have to prove our rightness. And when we remove our ego from it, we can allow somebody else's opinion of us to be right as well. But it doesn't have to be right with us. Right. We don't have to justify. We don't have to, our ego doesn't have to pop up and say, no, 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 I need to defend myself, because it doesn't really matter. You're just a reflection to them.
Yeah. Well, there is something it's so great as you're talking. I'd love to fall asleep to movies, and on Amazon the other day I watched Clear and Present Danger, a classic with Harrison Ford, where the president of the United States got in big trouble, and one of the aides says, "Deny it, avoid it," and Harrison Ford, the Boy Scout, basically said, "No, accept it, lean into it. Don't let
Yeah.
people guess. Accept that this happened and show how you were appalled." And there's so many studies that show that when you accept responsibility and when you show that you are fallible, people actually respect you more
Mm-hmm.
than they did when you were trying to act infallible. And that's the problem that you see all around us anymore. Politicians on both sides in the United States are ridiculous now with their inability to admit what everybody knows is false, and they perpetuate these lies. How are business people doing the same things that politicians are doing, but it
Yeah.
doesn't quite work as well for the business people?
Yeah. So I think one thing, and just to kind of expand upon what we were just talking about and how it leads into that personal responsibility, is whenever somebody says something to you. So now we're going to expand on the mirror concept, and you feel triggered, right? It's because you already have that judgment for yourself. And when we're already judging ourselves, we really don't want other people to see it as well. So now it becomes easier to say that you're squashing me, that you're the problem, that you said these really mean things about me on the internet, instead of saying, I'm already saying those mean things about myself. And that's why I was so triggered. Right. Because if you were going through there and somebody had said something completely off the wall that didn't even make sense, that you had never thought about yourself, you didn't have that judgment, you wouldn't think twice about it. You'd be like, that's weird. And you would just keep moving. But when someone's like, hey, you're bald, you're like, I am bald, and you already have that judgment about yourself in there. So it becomes a lot bigger. So we can't take that personal responsibility to now actually say, that triggered me because I'm already judging myself for whatever it is you're judging yourself for, and do that inward reflection, right? Just like politics, it's your fault or it's your fault. I'm not going to look in here. I'm not going to take care of the problem here. Somebody else is going to have to do it.
Well, the mirroring, that is a concept that I think so very few people really understand. And I think it's because so very few people have ever been taught to take responsibility for their failures. And in corporate America, I think that was probably the thing that drove me nuts more than anything, was the shifting of the blame and the
Yeah.
ability for a person to shift the blame and somehow or another accept all the responsibility for credit of something the good that was happening. When you sit down with a new coach, what is one of the main things that you really tried to get to be able to, move the needle faster than anything else with them?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things is that belief in self. So it's a belief in your capabilities. I think that a lot of people don't believe they're capable, and it's been justified in various ways, right? They've showed up, they failed, they've justified, they have validated their experience of not feeling worthy or capable of moving forward. So that's one of the biggest things that we get to first, is that feeling of that self-worth, help you feel really good about yourself, really connect inward. But you can't feel good about yourself until you take that responsibility. So a lot of these concepts that we've talked about, it's almost like a spiral. So the first probably 3 sessions, these are the main concepts that we talk about that we just spiral back into, and we just bring them all together. So by session 3, people have this new foundation of confidence that's not it's not surface confidence. Like, it's not like conditional confidence. It's not like, oh, I did good, someone liked my comment or my post. It's like, I don't care if anyone likes my stuff. If I'm showing up as me, then that's what feels good. That's how I validate my worth, is from myself, not from the outside. But that takes like kind of that spiral effect, like bringing all these different concepts that we've talked about together.
It seems so basic. And I think that that's kind of what you were
Yeah.
talking about on some of your posts is this isn't sexy. This isn't out of, you're just speaking truth. And I think the thing is the reason why that it's attractive, not just to someone like me that reads what you're talking about, but a lot of your clients, is people don't speak the truth anymore. And this concept of having to give ninth place trophies and participation awards and things like that, it is very, very foreign to a high achiever to get a participation award. So how do you get a person that perhaps thinks that everybody should get a participation award and everybody should be congratulated just for showing up? Shouldn't be congratulated for showing up. You should be congratulated for finishing. How do you help the people that may not have those concepts?
Yeah, that's a great analogy because, and you even think about it. I've seen in Little League now, if like they're those rings that they get and they're like fourth place. And I'm like, you got a ring for fourth place? That's wild. So like, I always like to tell my clients, how can you validate your experience while you're on your way to what you deem as your success? Because you're successful even before you reach that finish line, right? So how can you validate that along the way without giving up? Right? Without settling for, I'm just doing okay. I've got a couple of clients, that's good enough. So I think it's for person to person, but there's a fine line with celebrating yourself in the work that you're doing. So validating it, but recognizing that work's never done and you truly never get to the finish line when you're doing this type of work. There is no finish line. It is just a constant evolution of growth. Once you get to that celebration point of, oh, that was the goal I tried to hit, you've already dreamed up your next goal. So there never is a finish line. So recognizing that you're not going to get first place, right? It doesn't really matter. You're just going to get these successes. You're going to rack them up along the way and just enjoy your life. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about what somebody else is doing. Don't worry about if somebody else thinks you're successful or not, and start to look and find out if that's success to you.
How do you start to feel that it's a success to you? I mean, that seems, once again, I'm asking these questions that you're a bit of a kindred spirit in how I believe on some of these things. You tell me how to tell other people, Dad, burn it, you're doing okay. How do you feel good about those personal successes?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And again, it's so unique to each person. But what I would say on average share is, did you show up? And I know that seems like participation, but it's, did you show up to your highest today, right? Did you truly show up and put in the effort, or did you make decisions based out of fear, right? Regret, lack, loss. Because if you're making those decisions, then you don't get participation. You weren't participating. You were just being pushed along in life. But if you fought through, those fears and you stepped in with courage and you made intentional action and you did the things and you still came up short, yeah, you're not to where you want to be, but you're a little bit closer, because what did you learn from it? So what you would want to teach people is, how do you actually tangibly mark progress? So it's not about the success, it's marking progress, because you can still have progress with failures, right? Because you can fail and fail and fail and fail. And oftentimes you do, until you get that deemed success. So it's, how do you mark progress with your failures into your success? Did you show up? Did you make decisions out of fear and lack and loss? And if you did, that's not progress, right? That's regression.
One of the things that you said right there is progress. We as human beings, I really believe happiness comes from progression. Why are kids so happy? They're constantly improving. They're constantly they're learning new words, they're learning new skills. And you look at some of the most successful people in the world, and they're miserable. They medicate, they self-medicate, and they're just unhappy because they've accomplished everything. And I think what you're saying is, what's the next thing? What's next? What's next, right?
Yeah.
Because without progression, look, that's where I think that there's so much sadness that some of these very successful people feel.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't feel that their own successes. Sometimes they think that, like, oh my gosh, if I get to that next step. I saw the other day, what was that? It said, if you think the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, water your own grass. And I thought, heck yeah, why have I never heard that before? It's like, okay, if you want that greener grass, then do the work, right? Show up and do the work. But you have to recognize it and you have to see, oh, that grass is growing, it's growing. And then once it gets to be the green grass, then what do you want to, then what? Do you want to have a beautiful garden? But how can you be content with the success that you have and celebrate it and that be good? I always say, you're good enough as you are today. You don't have to do anything different. You don't have to be anyone different. You don't have to have any more successes to be good enough. You are today. So how can you feel that? How can you really set into that feeling of being good enough today while still progressing? That's what I think a lot of people have a hard time doing.
Well, couldn't have said it any better. And at this point, what I'd ask you is finish it off by looking at me as an established coach that's having a tough time getting clients. Set me straight. Help me understand what I've got to do to get back on that path of success.
Yeah. So what I would always ask for is, what are the thoughts that you have that you're projecting onto your clients? Because if you don't believe it, they're not going to believe it. So if you don't believe you're worthy of creating large amounts of success, they're not going to either. And so they're not going to come to you. Energetically, you will not match. People will not say yes to you if you're not saying yes to yourself. So the first question I would ask you is to ask yourself where you're not saying yes to yourself. Remove that judgment, and then let's make some plans around it.
Thoughts are things. And that's
exactly right.
That's actually scientifically proven now that thoughts are actual energy. And so people that talk and belittle that energy that you're talking about need to look into the science behind it. You're absolutely right on. Kayla, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me at my website, www.kaylaburchcoaching.com. So you can see all the different things I have going on Instagram at Kayla Burch, and also over on Facebook at Kayla Burch as well.
Good stuff. Thank you so much for being a part of Networking Star.
Thank you so much for having me.